Hello and welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels for this new season of Talking Europe, our European talk show on France 24. It's been dubbed Sarkozy and Cameron's War. The military intervention in Libya has finally resulted in the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. Meanwhile, the race is on for Libya's oil, with France and the UK hoping to secure a slice of the cake for themselves. But Italy, the former colonial power, has warned it will seek to remain Libya's largest oil partner. So has the battle for oil begun in Libya? This is one of the questions I will put to my guest who will soon join me on this set. Also, don't miss the second part of Talking Europe. We'll bring you a close-up interview with Daniel Cohn-Bendit, the emblematic head of the group of the Greens here in the Parliament. We'll talk about the recent upheavals of the European markets and about the future of the euro. But as always, let's start on our set here at the European Parliament to talk about Libya, Libya's reconstruction effort, and of course, Libyan oil, because we have to remember that Libya is home to Africa's largest known oil reserves, which makes it, of course, a very strategic place. Let me introduce you to my two guests today. To my right first, Arnaud Danjean. Hello.
Hi.
You're a French MEP from the European People's Party. You also belong to the ruling UMP party of President Sarkozy. And I add that you're the chair of the Subcommittee on Security and Defence. Now, to my left, Pino Arlacchi. Hello. You're from Italy. You belong to the Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament. And you're also a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, among many other things. Let me ask you first, Mr. Danjean. Nicolas Sarkozy has been very involved in this military intervention. It was, of course, a very risky decision, as we know. You must have been quite relieved the day you saw that Tripoli had fallen. Do you think that recent history will prove that Nicolas Sarkozy and David Cameron were right to insist on this military intervention in the country?
Indeed they were. Indeed they were, because we have to remind what was the situation when the intervention was decided. It was primarily for humanitarian purposes. Benghazi was about to fall. Gaddafi and his sons had promised that it would be a bloodbath in Benghazi, so we had to stop that. And the decision was primarily about that. We didn't want another Srebrenica. Sarkozy had very much in mind this image of powerless countries in Bosnia in the 90s. I think it's still haunting the minds of the European leaders. So we had to act. So that's what prompted the military intervention. And whatever happens afterwards, transition will not be easy. Many things can happen still in Libya today, but I think it was a just, fair and right decision to do so.
Mr. Arlacchi, Italy reluctantly agreed to join the coalition. We remember that your Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi first chose to help and defend his old friend Muammar Gaddafi. Do you think that the Libyan people and the Libyan leadership will remember that?
Yes and no. The attitude of the Italian government with Berlusconi was basically shameful to the eyes of many Libyans. Because first, they supported Gaddafi, they honored him. Berlusconi kissed his ring and his hands just a few months before the attack to Libya. And then Gaddafi was transformed in just a few weeks into a criminal, into an enemy of peace, democracy, and Western world. So not only people who support Gaddafi, but objectively, many Libyans will not trust very much a government like the Italian one and also other European governments who changed their position so quickly.
Now, before we talk about the reconstruction effort and about Libyan oil, let's watch our report there brought to us by our colleague from France 24.
Libya was the war, and Nicolas Sarkozy claims to be one of the victors. Present on the front line since intervention began, France was the first to recognise the National Transitional Council as the official representative of the Libyan people. And this has been enough to ensure the country plays a lead role in the reconstruction of Libya.
The awakening of the Arab people and their yearning for freedom enables us to realise their hopes and, once and for all, end this constant battle that we found ourselves in. On the one hand, defending values, and on the other, working with the reality of the situation.
The war is also a victory for French-British military cooperation, but Britain might not come off so well. Documents discovered in Tripoli reveal strong links between the Gaddafi regime and MI6 and the CIA. The US and Britain allegedly sent terror suspects to Libya to be interrogated. One of those subjects was Abdel Hakim Belhaj. He was sent to Libya in 2004 while Tony Blair was in office, and he was tortured. Now he heads up Tripoli's military forces. With the disappearance of Gaddafi, two countries might regret their actions: Germany and Italy. Long-term ally of Libya, Rome restricted itself only to opening its military bases to NATO and Qatar. As Tripoli's main business partner for some years, Rome fears it will lose its special advantages in terms of its access to Libya's oil and gas. Present in Italy since 1959, Italian petrol giant Eni has established contracts with the opposition to safeguard agreements that are already in place.
The gas resources for the country are critical on winter, so we need to have as many as possible ways of imports.
Germany might also regret its lack of intervention and reticence to acknowledge the National Transitional Council. In a bid to change this, the German foreign minister has committed his country to the reconstruction effort, although it could be too late for Chancellor Angela Merkel, whose popularity is waning. But nothing is set in stone, and many have secrets to hide. France reportedly sold weapons to the Libyan regime between 2007 and 2009, regardless of an official ban.
Mr. Danjean, you said that the intervention was guided by humanitarian reasons. This has been a very costly war for France. The French defense minister recently declared that it may have cost France 320 million euros. And now, of course, France hopes to secure a slice of the oil price in Libya. Do you think that French companies will reap the fruits of the involvement of the French state? I mean, do you think that France will gain access to Libyan oil?
It had already, as far as I know. So,
Total.
So some French companies were already there. Relations with Libya were not that bad before the war. So that's why we cannot say that this war was done under economical circumstances, or that French companies would push for war just to have access to the Libyan market, because we had already access to the Libyan market. So that's why it was political reasons, humanitarian reasons that prompted the war. Having said that, well, of course, I think in every conflict you have this post-conflict period in which each country is pushing its firms to get access for reconstruction market and for more long-term markets. So, I mean, it's you have seen that everywhere, from Bosnia to Afghanistan, Kosovo, everywhere.
And Iraq, I guess, as well.
Iraq, of course. With Libya, it's a bit different, because you have this, as you reminded us, you have this oil parameter, which is a big one. But beside all, you have it's still a huge country in terms of market. Yes.
Do you fear, Mr. Alaki, that we could see a battle for oil among Europeans? Your foreign minister, Mr. Frattini, said last weekend that there will be, I quote him, no colonial war between Italy and France. That sounds like a warning against France and Britain, the ones who might want to eat away from what Italy used to have.
No, I don't believe there will be any battle on oil. Italy, France, UK were already in the oil market in Libya with excellent relationship with Gaddafi. So it makes no sense to attack a country, make a war, just to get a better contract on oil. The real reason is different, more complicated. It started the Libyan war as a humanitarian intervention, but was quickly transformed into a regime change war with no legitimacy from the international community, going much beyond the mandate given by the Security Council. Was a big occasion to represent a framework of intervention by NATO, which is always the same: huge air power, a lot of destruction of infrastructures, and also a substantial number of victims, with the result, the final result, which is positive, but could have been achieved through different means, through negotiation and diplomacy, through the international intervention, with the UN intervention. I proposed since the beginning a UN intervention in Libya instead of a war and so much destruction.
Mr. Danjean, you don't seem to agree on that one.
On that we disagree because I don't think that any other organization could have achieved this result. I mean, the UN, it's a nice organization, it can be very efficient, but not when you have to work in an emergency case like Libya. When we talk about negotiation, what kind of negotiation? Gaddafi didn't want to negotiate. I mean, it was not possible to have a peaceful issue in Libya. So I think, unfortunately, it was the only way out. And this intervention, contrary to what we have known before in Afghanistan, in Kosovo, you mentioned a massive use of air power. It was not that massive. Otherwise, it would have lasted much less. It lasted many months. It was the longest air campaign so far in international military intervention, and it proved right in the sense that there were very, very few even collateral damages, what we call collateral damages, innocent victims, no casualties inside the coalition, and it was not that massive.
Unfortunately, information we got on all the Libyan war was very small, very biased, and we really don't know what is the exact amount of the destruction. The rebels spoke at a certain point of several tens of thousands of victims. We did not have any opportunity to have a serious picture of what was happening. What we have seen, of course, was not a air campaign that lasted years, but in few months, in a country like Libya, which is much smaller than the previous wars, much smaller than Iraq, much smaller than Afghanistan, you don't need to have years. But the way the war was conducted was always the same, a disproportionate use of air power. Negotiation was never tried seriously. Each time there was an attempt to negotiate, this attempt has been stopped by the
have negotiated the fate of Benghazi. When you have a few miles away from Benghazi, Gaddafi troops advancing and promising a bloodbath. You cannot negotiate at that time. You need to intervene.
That was the beginning, and I agree, but it was not the story afterwards.
What lessons do you draw as Europeans, members of the European Parliament, what lessons do you draw from this intervention? It was, of course, embarrassing for Europe to be unable to speak with one voice. Germany abstained during that key vote when the resolution was voted in the UN. What lessons do you draw from that?
It's very paradoxical, because on the one hand, it was led by European countries, namely France and Britain. And so in that sense, European countries, some European countries, they showed that they had the capacities and the political will and capabilities to deliver.
Without the help of the Americans.
Yes, indeed. Even though it was very important, was it so decisive? We still have to see. The lessons learned process will be interesting in that sense. So on the one hand, European countries were the leaders of this coalition. On the other hand, and you're right, and I think we agree on that, especially here at the European Parliament, there is a sense of great frustration because EU as such was out of the game. And this is a real problem.
Mr. Arlacchi.
Europe was totally sidelined by an intervention of basically France and the UK. And in my opinion, it was a political war with several lines of neo-colonial operation, trying to submit a country that, after all, was the only country that just a few years before renounced, because of international pressures, to nuclear armaments. The lesson for autocracies and dictatorship in the area is devastating. The lesson is, if you renounce to have nuclear armaments, you are at risk to end up like Libya.
I guess, Mr. Danjean, you won't, of course, agree on that we know for sure. Let me just ask you one last question. You said the EU was absent. How do you assess Lady Ashton's role here? Maybe she should have been more...
It goes much beyond the role of a person. I mean,
but do you agree that the limelight was stolen by David Cameron and Nicolas Sarkozy, who didn't want to give Europe a place in this?
I think, it's an emergency case. It was not part of a strategy elaborated months before or years before. So once it started, then there has to be a pilot on board. And I mean, it was done, the military intervention was done by NATO. I do regret that because I would have liked EU to play a bigger role, but once it started, you have to be efficient. NATO was efficient, this UK-France coalition was efficient, and it does matter. Then, politically speaking, diplomatically speaking, yes, we would have liked to have an EU, a stronger EU. It's not too late. I mean, the phase which is opening up now, this transition period, is very important, very important. It is crucial, it is full of risk and threats, and EU has to play a role now. And I'm very happy that
briefly.
EU is on the ground.
Very briefly,
now.
Mr. Arlacchi, do you think that Europe will now play a role in the humanitarian and reconstruction effort?
EU renounced since the beginning to any significant role in the Libyan crisis. Maybe the lesson for EU will be to try to be more active in the future. But what is happening now in Syria is showing us elements of pessimism. We are applying a double standard with Syria. We have been very tough on Libya. In Syria, every week we have several casualties, several innocent people who are killed by a dictatorship, by a terrible regime, and we do very little. We do not use, as EU and as international community, any significant instrument. So the double standard destroys our credibility in foreign policy.
Okay, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. There was, of course, the oil embargo, but you don't seem convinced that this will be enough. Now, we'll have to leave it there. Arnaud Danjean and Pino Arlacchi, thank you very much. Thank you for watching the first part of our program. Please stay with us. We'll return after the news break and we'll bring you a close-up interview with Daniel Cohn-Bendit, the emblematic head of the group of the Greens here in Parliament. We'll talk, of course, about this very jittery week on European markets and about the future of the euro. That's shortly after the news break.